Thank you so much, Melissa, and many thanks to Neil, our techie guru, who's making this all possible, and to Pharmacin Labs for this unique opportunity, my first webinar ever. I was sharing that I've done lots of stage performance and radio and podcasts, you name it, but this is the first webinar, so pretty cool. And I just want to thank Pharmacin also for really being a profound partner in this storytelling journey over the past 2 years. Really from the very beginning, Pharmacin has walked with my family and I and Dr. White, my physician, who you will hear about, in really getting out our message around the role that neurotransmitter testing and hormone testing played in my recovery and road to whole health and back to myself, which I really can't imagine having been possible if this testing were not available. So thank you, thank you. I think I'll start in the middle. I was a late bloomer, my husband and I both. I gave birth at 40, and you know, we met late in life. We had both always wanted children, but the sort of right person didn't come along till later in life. And I had never at 40 had a blip in my mental health, no anxiety, depression, insomnia, nothing. I'd really sort of sailed through. And we didn't have really a clue about what to expect or what could possibly happen in the realm of maternal mental health. We had heard a little bit about baby blues, a little bit about postpartum depression, but we had not heard about the possibilities for extreme anxiety postpartum, mania, bipolar. I would say that my birth experience was ideal in that it was everything I wanted. You know, ideally, mamas and papas would each get to sort of map out their birth plan and have it all sort of go as one would desire. And birth really did. It was that postpartum period that was far from what we had ever counted on or even really imagined. In that first month, Eric and I were pretty much blissed out. This incredible little human being, Adelaide, had arrived in a 10-hour birth at home with our midwife. No stitches. We were just madly in love with her. Our family and friends surrounded us, and Eric had time off. And, you know, we just soaked up every moment with her. And she would feed every hour and a half to 2 hours, day and night. And we were co-sleeping with her. And Eric would change often a nighttime diaper and help out in that way. And she did this thing called dream feeding. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's kind of my fantasy for myself. It's something that babies have this phenomenal capacity for. They sleep while eating. And I think they're really onto something there. I, on the other hand, was a first-time mama. This is normal, and I share this in my storytelling performance. I say, you know, mama bear hormones kick in our mama bear brain to stimulate feeding, bonding, attachment. And I would later in my journey find out, and I will share with you, that my hormonal picture really catapulted me far out of the realm of normal. And Adelaide would be sound asleep. You know, she would have fed or be even feeding and be sound asleep and kicking and gurgling and jerking. And with every sound or movement, my hormonal picture was skewed just enough that I was in a very hypervigilant mode. And I felt like I had to investigate to make sure she was still breathing. And my sort of first time mama vigilance was on high. And I did that so much in that first month that at some point I really stopped. I failed to get really any deep sleep, and at some point I could not fall asleep at all. I would say that also in that first month, you know, with the exhaustion, my emotions, my journey ranged from weeping and euphoria. Some of the tears and waves of emotion that come with the baby blues, and yet mine continued for a couple weeks past the baby blues period. In addition to sort of that vigilance around whether or not she was breathing, I started to have some real visceral fears that Adelaide or Eric or I might die. And I felt myself overwhelmed with emotion, where I would cry because I loved her so much. I would cry because I was so tired. I would cry because it was so beautiful. I would cry because it was so hard. And I, really began to go to a place far from, a place of myself, far from anything I'd ever really known. And I say in my show, somehow this experience of bringing new life into the world had cracked me wide open to the vulnerability of it all, and to the fact that not a one of us is guaranteed another 5 minutes on the planet. And I had a lot of spinning thoughts of, how will I keep her safe? How will I keep her safe? And, one of the things I learned in my journey as a survivor and on my path, on my way to becoming an advocate around maternal mental health, is that one of the precursors for a PMAD, a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder, is childhood trauma. Trauma, whether it's emotional, sexual, physical, whether it's childhood or even in your adulthood, birth trauma is a precursor for a PMAD. But so interesting, at 40, I really thought, I had time to do my work. I'd had time for therapy in my 20s. I had really, I thought, healed it all. I was ready. I was so glad that I waited that long to heal all my stuff before having a baby. And it's a funny thing what sleep deprivation and profound hormonal upheaval will do to you. And one of the things it can do is unearth unhealed wounds and bring up traumas from your childhood. So, for example, I was a survivor of sexual abuse, and that sexual abuse was not long-term, and it was not a family member, but it was a trauma in my childhood. And so every time I would bathe her or change her diaper, I would be overcome with feelings of, how will I protect this precious little being who needs me unlike I've ever been needed? I also, in this road as an advocate, have discovered that within anxiety and OCD postpartum, which is very common, repeating thoughts around our fears connected to our traumas are very, very common. I'll say that the day that Adelaide turned a month old, my midwife, Sandano, came to visit. It was the final home checkup. And my sleep deprivation at that point was so beyond anything my brain and body could manage that when she arrived that morning, she found me truly in another world. She says now, I really wish I would have written down what you said. She said, you sound like you were channeling Buddha. And she knew that while the state I was in was actually quite beautiful and profound and loving and full of compassion and forgiveness and love, she knew I wasn't safe, and she knew that Adelaide wasn't safe, and because Mama was no longer on planet Earth. And she's an extraordinary human being, my midwife Sandano, one of two superheroines in this story. She should wear a cape, truly. She stayed with Adelaide and I for many hours until Eric got home from work, and she, really supported him, and they talked about a plan where they would really get me to try and sleep. That sleep was really one of the key pieces that was happening. And so he did. She left. He took the baby. He, said, I have Adelaide. Just go sleep, Mama, go sleep. Well, I don't know at this point if major sleep aid was a part of the plan for later that night or the next day, but I was already past the tipping point. So I went to lay down, and there was no sleep to come. And instead, I ended up in a full-blown manic, and my first and only manic and psychotic state of my life, came out into the living room. And as I share in my show, which is tragic comedy, very sad, very funny, everything in between, I said I did this little naked piece of performance art for my husband, where I did all sorts of strange things. And I was really in this alternate world that I was in, due to this extreme hormonal upheaval and sleep deprivation. I had this sense that the world was vibrating at a higher and higher frequency, and that I had told Eric earlier that day, I said, babe, did you know in life there's only ever one choice? In every given moment, one choice. I said, fear, love, baby, fear, love. And I felt this incredible need to show to him, to illustrate to him that the world was, physical world was dissolving, becoming light, becoming love, and that those that chose love got to go to the light, got to leave behind the heavy of fear and suffering and judgment and hatred. And I wanted to make sure that he and Adelaide and our 3 kitties were coming with me. So I did all sorts of things, including threw a glass on the floor, and I stepped all over it with my bare feet, which of course, my whole message of baby, it's all love was sort of lost in translation. I really immediately after that, my mom and dad joined Eric, and they made a collective decision to take me to the ER with the hopes of getting me into inpatient care at the psych ward, which did happen. Adelaide was 1 month old, and this was both my husband and my first experience ever in our lives with any sort of mental health crisis. And it's happening in the midst of the most vulnerable being we have ever met has arrived in our laps, in our hearts, in our lives, and all she needs is mama. I feed her every hour and a half. And so I remember waking up in the psych ward, alone in a baby blue room with 3 cameras on the ceiling, and just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. I describe in my show that I felt like my arms had been ripped from my body and that I just might bleed out. And in the performance, there's this whole third of the show. I sort of take the audience to the psychosis, to this alternate reality that I experienced, which was bewildering and sad and disturbing, but it was also beautiful and hilarious and strange. And I also take you to the psych ward and the experience of the cast of characters that I met there, ranging from really, hardworking, compassionate, loving nurses and social workers, and a really creative and kind psychiatrist, and friends that I made with other psych patients, and just the hilarity and pain that can ensue in a psych ward, I found. That's a part of the show. But I'll say for this moment today that, for our purposes of really looking a bit at the medical journey, I spent 3.5 weeks in the psych ward when Adelaide was 1 month old. In that time, they tried 9 different psychotropic drugs. After nearly a month, Dr. Held, I call him in the story, that's not his actual name, but the psychiatrist deemed me well enough to go home. He considered me stabilized. My diagnosis was having experienced psychosis with mania, and that I was bipolar. The medication was lithium and trilofan. And I was told before I left the psych ward, if you want to stay out of here and you want to be with Adelaide, then you have to sleep. You have to sleep, and you have to stay on your meds. And if you don't sleep, you'll end up back in here. And if you go off the lithium, you will end up back in here, and you will quite possibly hurt Adelaide. So you can imagine, as a 40-year-old woman who'd known myself my entire life very well and deeply knew myself as a compassionate, loving, hard-headed being who was willing to take on challenges and fears and overcome them. And really my entire life I had been a caretaker and a bridge builder, a mediator, a peacemaker. To have this being arrive in my lap that really burst my heart wide open and allowed me to discover love at a whole new level, and not be able to provide the most basic things that in my mind I thought a mama should provide. I mean, I was really rocked to my core of my identity and who was I and what was possible. I say in my show, I had no idea that your brain could just go on sabbatical with no indication of returning despite her tenured post. And in my journey to whole health, I learned that a reported 15 to 20% of moms will experience a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder. This ranges from depression, anxiety, panic, PTSD, OCD, mania, bipolar. Like I said, I'd heard a little bit about the baby blues. I had no idea that OCD and major anxiety and anxiety of many different kinds is very common in the postpartum period. One of the things we know about those numbers, 15 to 20%, is that those are the moms that feel safe enough to actually share their internal world. And we know that because of the shame and stigma surrounding mental health, that there are many, many mamas and even papas. The reports now say 1 in 10 dads will experience postpartum depression. We know that there are many that suffer alone and that tell no one and that don't get help and don't make those reports. I also came to learn that 5% of moms will land in the psych ward. And I was among that small percentage. There was a time when I was, what I say in the show, I call in lockdown, and I often refer to it as the loony bin, that I thought about telling no one. I thought, no one can ever know I was in here. There was so much shame I had to wrestle with, and to really peel back the layers on. But when I got home, I had friends and friends of friends, friends of family visit me and bring food and see could they hold Adelaide or bring their kids over and be with her while I took a shower. Could they bring a meal? And they wanted to hear a bit of my story. And mom after mom after mom, my age, younger than me, my mom's age, and older than her, my mother-in-law, had a story to tell about her postpartum experience. And it may have been a moment, it may have been a week, a few days, it may have lasted for years. Some of it's still going on years after their baby or babies were born in terms of in the realm of depression, anxiety, OCD. And it was maybe the 30th friend who sat across from me and said, I've never told anyone this, but, and I kept hearing that, I've never told anyone this, but, and she shared with me that she had pictured herself for 9 months every day. She pictured herself hanging from the kitchen rafters, and she never told a soul. And she is a highly educated woman. She is an incredibly brilliant, smart, loving woman. Her husband is a social worker and her best friend, but she didn't feel safe telling anyone. So I thought, wow, well, if the fact that I spent time in the psych ward and that my case is so replete with the possibility for stigma and shame, if that makes space for many mamas and papas to be truthful about their experiences and take what they have really shoved in their dark corners and bring them out into the light, then I'm going to tell my story from the mountaintop. And so that's what we've done. We have really dedicated the last 2 years of our lives to 25 performances. And we toured my story all over the state of Montana, 13 shows, packed houses everywhere, 10 sold out. And in September, we left on a year-long West Coast tour and are coming off sold-out shows in Seattle, Pasadena, LA, and it's been extraordinary. One of the pieces, paramount pieces in our mission, and I will talk about several, is my actual medical pathway to healing. And when I got home, a couple days after I got home, for the first time in my life, I started, well, the second time, the first was that first month. But while I was in the psych ward, I was not experiencing insomnia. 2 days, day 2 home, major insomnia kicks in, right? It makes a lot of sense. I'm told if you do not sleep, you'll end up back in here. So going to sleep was a scary thing. And clearly I wasn't fully balanced in my brain and my body yet either. And I was having multiple anxiety attacks a day and major insomnia. And then I had a plethora of side effects from the lithium. The most difficult of the side effects was this complete emotional flattening. And while the psychotic state, the manic state, was problematic and dangerous and had all sorts of pieces to it that needed to be addressed, within it and within my journey through many of the different meds they tried, I still felt this profound love for Adelaide, and I was connected to my emotions. Once the lithium kicked in, I knew I loved her. I couldn't feel anything. And there was this small voice in me that kept sort of saying, this isn't you, this isn't possible. And I had quite a journey to make a decision around that. And I did come to the place that I do not have it in me to raise my child not feeling love for her. There has got to be another pathway. And my midwife, Sandano, superhero number 1, introduced me to Dr. Christine White of Black Bear Naturopathic. She's a naturopathic physician in Missoula, Montana. Also should wear a cape. She truly saved my life. And Dr. White did complex neurotransmitter testing and hormone testing, which she could not have done without Pharmacin and the labs that Pharmacin provides. She looked at my neurotransmitters, she looked at my hormones, and when she got the results back and I sat down with her, she said, I have no idea how you got out of bed today, how you dressed yourself, how you drove yourself here. You should not be functioning. It turns out that my progesterone, estrogen, serotonin, melatonin, and dopamine were critically low. And she said she'd never seen anything like it, not at those levels. My testosterone, adrenaline were through the roof, and my cortisol was spiking at night. And she said to me, and I say this, I share this in the show, she said, this might feel something like you have this heightened ability to see, smell, and hear the tiger in the jungle, but you have none of the hormones to help you figure out what to do about the fact that you just saw a tiger. And it was incredible. I mean, once we had those results in our hands from those tests, it was extraordinary because we were no longer shooting in the dark. She was looking at the root causes of my symptoms, and she could address me and my mental health, my physical health, my emotional health as a snowflake, the snowflake that I am, that we are. And so with nutrients and herbs and vitamins and minerals and bioidentical hormones and various layers of major sleep aid, she began to address everything that she saw in those tests, and she really hit it over the head. It felt miraculously fast. My memory is, and she'll be on later this month, and she may from her records have the precise number of days, but that it took around 3.5 weeks, maybe 4, for my anxiety attacks to fade to nothing, for my insomnia to fade to nothing, for me to begin to have a sense of well-being or the possibility that I might get well again, for me to begin to glimpse myself again. And as all of those remedies and that approach really kicked in my gut and my brain, one of the largest pieces that still remained, and it was crystal clear, was that emotional flattening. And so I had a series of conversations with my team, which included my dad, my Aunt Dorothy, who was a psych nurse for 40 years, her trusted colleague, a psychiatrist, my mom, my dad, my husband, Dr. White. And we, sort of collectively, and really I, with their support, and the information I was gathering from them and information I gathered from Postpartum Support International and my research of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, I decided to go off the lithium. And I did that in my mind slowly. Looking back now, I think it probably was quite fast. And I have walked with other families, not off their lithium, but on their healing path. And I've met families that, and mamas and papas, when mama is that soon out of the psych ward. And I don't know that I would recommend anyone go off that quickly, but I'm not a prescriber, so I don't have to have those sorts of opinions. I do know that I listened to my heart, I followed my gut, that Dr. White was very effectively addressing my symptoms. We had a safety plan in place, a team in place, and a prescriber on the team in case things were to go wrong. And I went off the lithium, and I have not had another symptom or episode since that time. As I went off the lithium, my emotions came back, and I came back. My sadness, my happiness, my joy, my love, my ability to feel things, my ability to mourn what had happened, to laugh again, to be angry, to feel fully human. And that was the first moment I knew in my body and heart and mind that I would return to myself. And I didn't know it until then.